privilege to come see your father for the first time in 27 years. It hit me that way, and I remember that memory distinctly. That remembering how old I was. I had to fly in there, drive a car quite a long way to even get to a place so remote and obscure and bleak and horrifying. It looked horrible, The whole
Yeah.
thing was a horrible scene, horrible setting, horrible environment, horrible experience. The whole thing was a horror show. It really was, totally.
We're
And
recording right now as we speak, and you're
and
telling the story about what
so
had
the whole
happened.
thing. But yeah, he was deprived of the right to vote. He was deprived of the right to be a man. He was deprived of the right to date a woman. He was deprived of every considerate life. What does the American Constitution say? We're guaranteeing life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. He was deprived of every bit of that. Everything that our ancestors fought for was guaranteed in the Constitution. My father was unjustly deprived of all of his life, most of his adult life.
All his
And
constitutional freedoms were robbed of him
yeah,
at the airport.
and because he got upset about his son being thrown into an orphanage and abused, and they manipulated that into a charge, and some other things I guess he did that were not too good, but understandable when a man's going through a hideous divorce, losing his son, but nothing that rose to a level of a major crime, I mean, they concocted most of that around. I feel like if you lose your temper, they can concoct the story around
Oh,
that.
yeah.
That you're nuts and put you in a place like that. They can build the rest of the story.
You can build a story
to give them a little excuse if they want to put you away. And if you upset powerful people, and apparently because who my mother had a relationship, they decided that they were going to put him away, as they called it. I remember that quote when I was growing up. They were going to put him away in a place where the sun never shined, and that was Farview Mental Hospital for the criminally insane.
She did.
And
In fact,
her Dr. P did a job on him, and the courts went right along with the program and the paper. And then once he was in there, nobody helped him. His family was shamed.
They sent him away.
Yeah, they were immigrants. They were basically immigrant people, and they didn't know what to do. My dad was the oldest child. Most of the other kids were younger. They didn't know. They kept their secret from them, and the people were from the old country. They didn't know about the American system of justice. They had no money to hire lawyers never ending. They had no money to drive 400 miles on the diagonal from Pittsburgh area to the Scranton area. And they thought it was best just to forget him and call him dead and never speak of him again.
And that's how you found out. You found out about your dad because you researched about your family, because you were left in an orphanage. And when you did the research, you found out that your family was actually telling a story that you never heard before. So you basically drove up and found out. That's how you found your dad.
Well, that's why I went up there, because eventually, after I got out of Penn State, I did make contact with the Fanala side of the family who I'd never been allowed to associate with. And I started to hear these stories about how it all came about, flying into Allegheny Airport and finding my mother with another man and getting upset. And the other side of the story came out, and then the few memories I had from the earliest years of my mother and father, I started to put one and one together and add it up. And I said, there's more to the story, and I got to go see this man. So eventually it resulted in me flying up there, renting a car, and actually going to see this father of mine who I had been told was no good, and his family was no good, all this other nonsense. And what I saw was a man who was really a dead man walking. Had been destroyed mentally. He was dead, but he wasn't buried yet. They basically had killed him. When they killed his brain, they killed him. You think my dad wasn't buried? He was loping around like a zombie, shuffling one foot in front of the other, and like I said, barely enough intelligence to raise a spoon to his mouth. He had that other habit, I guess, and shuffle some soup in his mouth, and that was it. Conversation, realization, comprehension, it was all gone. I don't think he ever really comprehended even who I really was.
How did he seem like when you took him out to the restaurant? What was it like?
It was just like sitting across from a zombie. I mean, you would talk to him, and he would just look at you with a what they used to call 50 mission stare. You know, a soldier in combat. Every soldier who's been in combat knows what that stare looks like. It's called shell shock. You know,
Yeah.
when a man's mind is blown from the craziness
And
of
they
violence and war.
basically
Yeah,
drugged
he
them.
had that look.
They probably did what they do is and
Yeah,
we've been talking
yeah,
about this, about the greatest fears, about the tranquilizers, and how
right.
you
Yeah.
could be tranquilized into a zombie.
Well, he was probably fearful because for decades, if he'd opened his mouth, he was beaten savagely. So he was probably afraid to even open his mouth or show because he was probably think this will get back to him and he'll beat me again. You know, he was probably terrified because he knew the only way you survive in Farview is keep your mouth shut, look like a zombie, and don't raise any stink because they will torture you, they will beat you senseless. So that may have carried over. He really probably didn't even trust who I was. He thought maybe I was the spy for the prison, you know? I mean, he didn't comprehend who I really was, his son. He'd been tricked and manipulated and beaten so many times.
And your dad was healthy. He was born healthy. He was a young man, and he was in the Army Air Corps. Think about this. By the time he left the airport, he was leaving in approximately around 1941. They put him in a forced labor camp.
Well, it was more like 19, because I was born in 43, so it would have had to been after 43. You know, 43, 44, 45, when this all unfolded, you know.
This was going on during World War II, so
it was during World War II. It was all unfolding during the latter part of World War II.
And we're getting the whole story that most likely he flew in to find out what happened to his son.
Well, he happened to come in with a flight crew, and they landed. They weren't expected to land. They didn't know they were going to land at Allegheny Airport, but it happened. And he thought, wow, an opportunity to see my wife and kid. And she didn't know he was coming. He didn't even know. So he knocks on the door, and she says, what the hell are you doing here? You know?
Oh, because she was in the middle of
entertaining another man. You know?
She was having an affair.
Generated a lot of conflict and divorce and excitement. You know how those things go. You know, people say things, do things. They want to know who you have the affair with, and people threaten each other, and you know it happens a lot. And people don't get.
I want to know how many relatives that I know of in our family alone that knew about the affair that was going on.
Well, the important thing, Jenny, is nobody gets a life sentence as a slave laborer for something like that. You might get 6 months or whatever, or a couple of years for carrying on like that during a divorce, but you're not going to get a life sentence in a place like that and be beaten half to death and lobotomized. That's way out of control. But that wasn't uncommon. If you read the book, Cold Stories, there are men that were put there for even very minor things like domestic violence issues, and I mean the most minor. They get a bar fight or something, and then somehow they resisted the police a little bit. We're shoving them around, and they have ways of concocting the situation.
Well, let's just talk about right now, like by today's standards, if something like that were to happen, how many people fear that the mental health system would turn you in and you would never see your home or family again, and without a proper attorney and without a proper like constitutional freedoms matter here, everyone. Even in the mental health system, they cannot take your rights away. This was what this is what I can't stand about Hillary Care and the whole ACA Affordable Care Act, because really you have health care freedoms and privileges that are constitutional freedoms. Your constitutional come from the Constitution. Okay, I'm giving George a last minute or so. Go ahead, George. Tell us the rest of the story.
Well, I want to emphasize the fact that when you're declared to be criminally insane, that is the highest, worst, most disgusting crime, worse than even being a murderer. And when you're falsely accused of that, you know, I mean, nobody should be lightly tagged with that label, let alone and unjustly tagged with, because you have no rights. You can't vote. You can't do anything. You're only confined to an institution for the rest of your life and treated horribly, and you have no hope of ever getting any release. So while they were able to take men who committed relatively minor crimes by that standard and concoct paperwork to to turn them into criminally insane inmates, which meant they could do what they wanted with them for the rest of their lives, work them as slave laborers and exploit them on the books as inmates to get funding and do what they want, beat them half to death, and they would never be held accountable. You could use and abuse somebody, and you could never be put on trial for murder, and which somebody should have been. There should have been mass trials of people have committed murder. It was never happened.
And you were in law enforcement too, so you used to be a prison guard and law enforcement, so what the type of people that belong in the prison. Your dad did not belong there.
That's right. I worked in the correctional system, and I did that job just to see what my dad went through, get a little sample. That's the main reason I became a correctional officer. I went to the academy, and I was the top of my class, by the way, and I worked there, and I saw it with my own eyes. And this was relatively just a state prison, where it was, by today's standards, really much nicer than what he went through. But I wanted to see what incarceration looked like from the inside. By God, I did, and I thought of my dad every day I went in there, what he must have been like to look out at those bars and thought that he had no future, no life, no hope, nobody cared, nobody visited, and the only thing he had to look forward to was the next meeting or the next day of slave labor. Not to imagine never being able to drive a car or date a woman or see it raise his child. How many thousand times he must have thought of me and cried. Can you imagine?
The fact that you worked in law enforcement and corrections, that definitely gives a whole different perspective about what you saw, what a real inmate who has committed a vile, horrific crime is one thing. What your dad did is your dad was robbed of his constitutional freedoms. He didn't go to court. There was no jury. There was no nothing. He basically was thrown in a gulag.
That's right. I mean, it's like the Soviet Union or Nazi Germany. Every bit is equivalent. Every bit. There is no difference hardly between what is done under Stalin and when they would take Russians who.
And that happened here.
Oh yeah, they said, "Well, you belong in a mental hospital." You know,
a gulag. Listen.
Off you went to a gulag.
Oh yeah.
Re-educated or drugged or whatever.
The re-education camps are the mental health programs. Yeah, the Democrats run it too.
And the way the Russians are, what you mean, because after a while they let you out. But in America, they never let you out. It was a life sentence. You die, basically.
The Democrats that run these programs that are trying to get funded, and they get funded this way, they're going to answer to other authority. It's a whole different ballgame now that you got President Trump as president.
That's right.
It's being investigated every time, and every time they turn around, they find out more of this seedy, wild, weird behavior. And the fact is, and I want to leave off with this because I wanted to jump in real quick. We're gonna extend it out another minute because I want you to finish the rest of the story about how you were the state corrections officer. Here, back in a minute.
All right.
Okay, we're back for the second segment. You got the rest of it from here.
All right. Not only did I accomplish it as an electrical engineer, an aero engineer, but I deliberately went and became a correctional officer, went to the police academy, and was number one in my class, graduating, and went in to see with my own eyes what it's like to be confined behind bars. And I saw and just looked in the eyes of those men that I had control over as an officer, and I thought of my father every single day, crying that he could never see his son, he could never have a life, he could never be a man, he could never be a human being, and it broke my heart to even do that job, and I could only stand it for so long. I mean, you had hepatitis B, hepatitis C, you dealt with things in any prison system that are outrageous. They couldn't vote, but they had many more rights than my father had. And it was still horrible every day seeing men confined, the same old thing, the same four walls, the same cages, the same routine, the same lousy food, the same orange uniform, the the boring, the boring. I mean, this destroys men's mind alone. If you weren't crazy when you went in a place like Farview, it wouldn't be long before you were driven insane by the place. It was that bad.
It comes down to constitutional freedoms as we wrap it up here. And I hope by everybody who's gotten a chance to get to know George, as somebody who's I ever since I started reading that book, I know that everything comes down to the Constitution and your Bill of Rights and your constitutional freedoms. I'm going to leave you off here at the very end. There's about 15 seconds here.
All right. I wish you all a great Memorial Day, and think about my father, George Stephen Fanala. He must be smiling from heaven. I hope he's proud of his son for trying to clear his name, because I'm proud to be his son. And he's as much a war hero to me as anybody else for what he endured. And I salute him and all the other veterans.
And that's so true, because he was a soldier, a veteran, and he was robbed of everything. He was robbed of the very basic freedoms he was fighting for in World War II. And I, especially on Memorial Day holidays like this, what a special way to remember your dad, George C. Fanala. Is it George Stephen? George Stephen Fanala. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, George Stephen Fanala on Memorial Day holiday, because I can't think of a more important time to spend is like with family, and what a way to have learned about his story. So thank you again for doing this, George. I mean, I don't know if we'll have another video or another interview about this. I'm sure we will, though.
Well, let me tell you this, Jennifer. We're going to have a memorial of him briefly. The story of my father, proudly, at our little town. We usually have a little get together of some kind for Memorial Day, and I would stand up and tell them about my father, the whole soldier hero, in the most unorthodox way, by what he went through, and I will proudly tell his story at that event.
By the way, we left a message with Icon Pictures, and I hope that this not only becomes a film, but it'll be a blockbuster, because it brought tears to my eyes. I could see the soldier that he was. I could see like this becoming a love story about a son and a father. And boy, would it be an awesome Father's Day gift to have that kind of yes or no answer from Icon Pictures. We don't know. I don't know. But I'm going to tell you, the screenplay and manuscript alone would be hard to put down. Thank you, George.
I think so.
Thank you, George. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing such a beautiful story between a son and a father on this Memorial Day.
Well, if it helps somebody, I'm more than happy to do it.
It changed my life. I'm a changed person by it.
Well, if that's testimony to how good the film would be, you can't have any higher honor than that. Changing your life. And if it can change other people's lives, wouldn't that be a wonderful thing?
I think everybody that would see this on film, if Icon Pictures were to film this or even at least read the manuscript, I think you would have the same response. Like they would be like awestruck by it. It's a very awestruck. I was awestruck by it. I was like, I think it has to be told in a film. That I believe.
There you go.
All right, everybody. Thank you for having the time to set aside to listen to this very special broadcast on this Memorial Day holiday. God bless, and God bless America.